Have you ever wondered what history would look like if someone outside our world witnessed it unfold? An alien confessed they visited Earth during Jesus' time, and what they saw is shocking. Not myth, not scripture. A cosmic eyewitness account that reveals the hidden layers behind miracles. The real reason a single man in a dusty Roman province drew the attention of an interstellar species, and why his presence bent reality itself. What if the story you know is only the surface of a much deeper truth, one that has been waiting for the right moment to resurface? Before we begin, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and tell me where you're listening from. Your engagement helps unlock the next chapter of this journey. And now let your mind settle, your breath slow, and your curiosity sharpen, because this is where the real story begins. On the night, a forgotten visitor finally broke their silence. It happened just after midnight, the hour when the world feels thinnest and every shadow hides a deeper possibility. Jalen Reyes had been awake for hours, the soft blue glow of his laptop illuminating a life that had slowly collapsed into questions he could no longer outrun. He had once trained for priesthood, once believed certainty lived inside scripture, once thought faith was a ladder he could climb. Now he sat alone in a small apartment, surrounded by books that no longer answered anything. The silence was heavy and absolute, until it wasn't. The air shifted first, a subtle pressure like the atmosphere inhaling. The temperature dropped next, not in a way that felt dangerous, but in a way that felt intentional. Then came the light. Not bright, not blinding, but a soft sphere of pale silver forming in the corner of the room. It expanded slowly, as though it were deciding whether Jalen was ready to see what emerged from it. When the shape finally stepped forward, Jalen did not scream. Something deeper than instinct told him this moment had been approaching for a very long time. The being before him was tall, slender, impossibly calm. Smooth blue-gray skin reflected the faint glow still shimmering in the air. Its eyes were enormous and black, yet somehow filled with emotion older than anything Jalen had studied. It did not speak aloud. The voice bypassed sound entirely, entering his mind with a clarity that made spoken language seem primitive. It introduced itself as Varyn, an observer from a lineage that had watched humanity for thousands of years. Not conquerors, not saviors, witnesses. Varyn's presence carried no threat, only an unbearable truth settling itself in Jalen's chest. For a moment he wondered if exhaustion had finally broken him. But the steadiness in the creature's gaze shattered that possibility. Varyn told him they had visited Earth during a lifetime that changed the trajectory of human consciousness. They stood in the dust of Judea. They walked among crowds who did not see them. They observed a man the world would later call divine. And with a calmness that shook Jalen more than any warning could have, Varyn confessed that they had watched Jesus with their own eyes, and what they witnessed was nothing like the stories humans were taught to believe. The confession was only the beginning. Long before Varyn ever stepped into Jalen's world, long before scripture became doctrine and doctrine became chains, something strange occurred in a forgotten corner of the Roman Empire. Varyn explained that their species does not travel without reason. They do not wander the cosmos, searching for spectacle. They are drawn only to disturbances in the fabric of consciousness, the kind of disturbances that ripple through dimensions, like a silent alarm. And on Earth, nearly 2,000 years ago, a signal emerged unlike anything they had recorded across countless worlds. It began as a faint pulse, a rhythmic tremor emanating from a region most civilizations would have dismissed as insignificant. Judea, a small and restless province suffocating under Roman occupation, became the center of an energy spike so unusual that entire observer fleets shifted their attention toward Earth. Not a weapon, not a technology, not an invasion. A single human life radiating a frequency powerful enough to be detected beyond stars. Varyn described the moment their instruments captured the anomaly. What they measured did not behave like emotion, thought, or physical energy. It was something higher, something ordered, something coherent, as if one human heart had learned to beat in harmony with the universe itself. Their species had seen this pattern only a handful of times in all their recorded history, and in every case it marked the emergence of a consciousness capable of altering the fate of an entire planet. The signal strengthened over the years, growing from a flicker into a steady beacon. Villagers in Judea felt it as a sudden ease in their suffering. Children felt it as unexplainable comfort when they passed through certain towns. Animals reacted with instinctive calm, and by the time the pulse reached its peak, there could be no doubt. The epicenter was a single man whose life would eventually fracture human history into before and after. To Varyn's kind, it was impossible to ignore. They arrived not out of curiosity, but out of necessity. When a consciousness bright enough to reshape a timeline appears, the cosmos demands observation. Their mission was simple: watch, record, understand the phenomenon unfolding inside a human body. What they discovered in Judea surpassed every expectation, and it was only the beginning of what they would witness. Varyn did not speak of memory the way humans do. For them, the past is not recollection but a living archive, something they can open and project with absolute clarity. When they allowed Jalen to witness what their species saw above ancient Judea, the room around him dissolved. What replaced it was not imagination, but the direct imprint of an alien vantage point, observing a world unaware it was being watched. The first image was the sky, not the familiar blue of daylight or the muted black of night, but a layered spectrum of colors, visible only to eyes shaped beyond Earth. Cloaked vessels drifted in the upper atmosphere, their forms undetectable to Roman patrols and invisible to the people who lived and died under empire rule. These ships did not hum, did not glow, did not disrupt the air. They existed like thoughts suspended above a province, too small to matter to the rest of the world, yet too important to ignore for those attuned to the anomaly rising from it. Jalen felt the perspective shift. He saw what Varyn saw through senses not designed for human use. The ground below was a mosaic of villages, dusty roads, soldiers marching with weary precision, and crowds gathering around a man who seemed ordinary to the eye, but extraordinary to the field surrounding him. The frequency spike Varyn had described was not abstract anymore. It pulsed like a luminous tide moving outward from one human being, affecting everything it touched. Animals paused when he approached, their instincts recognizing a harmony they could not explain. People argued less in his presence, their nervous systems quieting as though responding to an invisible signal. Even the harsh Roman officers felt a flicker of unease, their authority threatened not by rebellion but by an inexplicable shift in the emotional climate of the region. Inside the cloaked ships, Varyn's kind recorded these fluctuations with a precision no human device could match. They tracked heart coherence in crowds, shifts in electromagnetic fields, and subtle changes in the collective human aura. What stunned them was not the miracles that would one day fill scripture. It was the man's effect on consciousness itself. His presence elevated everything around him, aligning minds, hearts, and energy patterns with an order impossible for any ordinary human to generate. From their vantage point, it was clear. Something unprecedented was unfolding in a forgotten province of the empire, and the watchers knew they were witnessing the beginning of a transformation the world was not prepared to understand. The vision shifted again, and Jalen felt the world settle into a time long before crowds followed teachings, and long before rumors of miracles spread across dusty roads. Varyn drew him backward into the earliest pulse of the anomaly, a moment when the force that would one day shake empires existed only inside a quiet child in a forgotten village. Nazareth appeared not as holy ground but as a cluster of simple homes, the kind of place history should have swallowed without a trace. Yet even here, something extraordinary had already begun. The boy who would one day be called a savior did not shine with beams of light or carry any physical sign that would make him stand out. His clothes were worn, his hands small and calloused from ordinary work. His laughter sounded like any child's laughter. But the air around him told a different story, one that no scripture ever dared to fully record. Varyn showed Jalen the invisible field that surrounded him even at a young age, a coherent hum that resonated like a tuning fork, striking the soul of anyone who wandered close enough. Villagers who carried the weight of exhaustion felt a strange sense of ease when the boy approached. Arguments between neighbors dissolved before they fully formed. Mothers with crying infants found their children settling instantly in his presence. Even animals responded in ways the villagers could not explain. Stray dogs followed him without barking. Birds landed near him without fear. The emotional atmosphere around the boy shifted effortlessly, as if reality itself softened to accommodate him. This influence was not intentional. It was not a miracle in the traditional sense. It was the natural emanation of a consciousness already vibrating far above the ordinary spectrum of human awareness. The boy did not yet understand it, but the world around him responded instinctively. Varyn revealed moments of villagers pausing mid-task, overcome by a calm they could not name, or feeling a sudden clarity that vanished as soon as the boy walked away. These subtle transformations never made it into holy texts, but they were the early signs of what he would later become. From their vantage in the sky, Varyn's people recognized this frequency pattern as something exceedingly rare, something they had witnessed only a handful of times across galaxies. A soul awakening long before adulthood, shaping the environment without effort, shifting hearts without words. And in that small village of Nazareth, the anomaly that drew the watchers across the stars quietly found its first breath. The vision dissolved again, and what replaced Nazareth was a landscape far more austere. Jalen felt wind across desert stone, the kind that stripped away illusions and left only truth behind. Varyn allowed him to see what history buried and what doctrine refused to acknowledge. The child, who radiated peace in villages, did not grow into his power by accident. There were hands that shaped him, teachers who guarded knowledge older than any empire, and influences that did not originate from Earth at all. The first were the Essenes, a hidden community whose existence was whispered but never fully recorded. They lived in silence, in discipline, in devotion to principles not taught in temples or synagogues. These were initiates of an ancient lineage, custodians of techniques for expanding consciousness, healing the body, and purifying the mind. Jesus entered their circle long before the world knew his name, not as a prodigy seeking glory, but as a boy whose presence even the elders could not fully decipher. Jalen watched as the young man learned breathwork capable of altering brainwaves and meditations designed to open dormant senses. He studied the geometry of the body, the resonance of sound, and the hidden meaning within sacred texts, stripped of later interpretations. He was taught to perceive energy fields, to calm storms of emotion with a single exhale, and to hold compassion with such intensity that it reordered the pain of others. These teachings existed long before Scripture, passed through generations of quiet mystics, and kept alive despite persecution. But there was more, something the Essenes themselves could not take credit for. On certain nights, when the desert sky revealed its vast darkness, a different kind of instruction arrived. Not in words, not in visions of imagination, but in transmissions. Varyn revealed that Jesus received guidance from non-human intelligences who communicated through dreams and altered states induced by the practices he had mastered. They did not instruct him as a pupil. They reminded him of what his soul already carried, activating memories buried beneath human conditioning. What he learned from them was not doctrine but alignment, a way of tuning his consciousness to match the frequency of creation itself. This was the foundation of every miracle attributed to him. His power was not bestowed but awakened, and as he absorbed the teachings of earth and sky alike, the quiet anomaly in Judea began transforming into a force no empire could contain. The desert dissolved, and Jalen felt himself drawn into a different kind of space, one that did not resemble any physical location on Earth. Varyn was no longer showing places or people but the hidden architecture beneath events humans called miracles. What unfolded before Jalen was not mystical fog or symbolic metaphor. It was structure, law, pattern, the true physics that Jesus manipulated with a mastery no human science has yet approached. Varyn began by revealing the field surrounding every living being, a shimmering aura of bioelectric information that extended far beyond the skin. Most humans never sense it, never shape it, never realize it hums with the memory of their wounds and the weight of their emotions. But Jesus perceived these fields with absolute clarity. To him, a person's suffering was not invisible. It appeared as distortions in their energetic lattice, irregular pulses, fragmented rhythms trapped in the body like echoes that never faded. Jalen saw a sick man lying in a crowded street, his breathing shallow and erratic. In the vision, Jesus did not perform a dramatic gesture. He simply approached, and the field around him expanded like a soft wave of order descending upon chaos. Coherence was the key, Varyn explained. His mind and emotions were aligned with such precision that his presence alone reorganized the vibrational disorder in others. Healing was not a gift. It was resonance. As Jesus placed a hand near the man's chest, Jalen watched the frequencies synchronize. The man's chaotic pulses began matching Jesus's steady rhythm, the way two tuning forks resonate when one is struck. Pain dissolved not because of magic, but because the body remembered its natural state and returned to it under the influence of a consciousness operating in perfect harmony. Intention amplified the effect. Jesus held a vision of the man already healed, already whole. That unwavering inner image transmitted itself into the man's field, rewriting the information his body used to maintain itself. The cells responded instantly, reorganizing according to the higher pattern being broadcast into them. Bioelectric resonance, emotional coherence, and focused intention formed the engine behind every miracle. Jesus did not break the laws of reality. He operated from a layer of reality humanity has forgotten how to reach. And as Jalen watched the man rise to his feet, his mind reeled with the realization that the miraculous was never supernatural. It was simply human potential fully awakened. The scene shifted again, carrying Jalen into the chill of pre-dawn air along the shoreline of a vast lake. The world was muted, the sky barely awake, the water dark and restless beneath an unseen weight. This was the moment stories had inflated into spectacle, the moment generations had labeled impossible. Yet what Varyn revealed erased every trace of myth and replaced it with something far more unsettling. The truth was never about defying nature. It was about transcending the fear that binds humanity to it. Jalen watched the young teacher step onto the wooden boat, exhausted from a night of instructing followers whose minds struggled to hold what he offered them. When he asked for a moment alone, the others assumed he meant only to pray. None of them understood that he was preparing to shift his state of being entirely. The lake was never meant to be a stage for a miracle. It was meant to be a lesson, one that only a few would glimpse and even fewer would comprehend. Jesus walked away from the shoreline, not toward the open water but inward, deep into a concentration so profound that the air around him thickened. Varyn showed Jalen the energetic shift as it occurred. Fear dissolved first, melting from the body like mist, vanishing under sunlight. Then came coherence, the alignment of breath, heartbeat, emotion, and intention until they formed a single unified rhythm. Finally came elevation, the raising of his entire field to a frequency that interacted differently with matter itself. When he stepped forward, the water did not harden beneath him. Nothing physical changed at all. What changed was his relationship to the field, holding the water together. His elevated state created a temporary suspension of normal gravitational influence, a delicate interplay between consciousness and environment. He was not floating, he was harmonizing. Jalen saw the disciples' fear spike the moment they noticed him, and Varyn revealed how instantly that fear disrupted their own fields. One tried to imitate him, stepping onto the water with trembling hope. For a fraction of a second, his frequency rose. The surface tightened beneath his foot. But fear surged, coherence shattered, and the water reclaimed him immediately. The miracle was never the walk. It was the lesson buried inside it. Jesus was showing his followers that reality bends only when fear releases its grip. He was teaching them that faith was not belief, but a state of consciousness strong enough to reshape the world around them. The desert winds faded, and Jalen found himself standing amid a vast hillside overlooking a sea of faces. The air trembled with anticipation, not because people expected a miracle, but because something inexplicable stirred within them even before a single word was spoken. Varyn revealed that this moment, later remembered as the Sermon on the Mount, was never meant to be a lecture. It was an activation, a broadcast of consciousness disguised as simple teachings. Jalen felt the field before he understood it. Thousands gathered with wounds hidden beneath their clothing and burdens buried beneath their silence. Grief, worry, guilt, and longing formed an invisible fog around them, thick enough to taste. Yet when Jesus approached, the atmosphere changed instantly. His presence generated a pulse, a resonance similar to the one Varyn's instruments had detected years before, but amplified by the collective heartache of an entire crowd. When he began to speak, the words carried more than meaning. Each sentence was a vibrational key coded to awaken emotional circuits dull from suffering. "Blessed are the peacemakers" was not poetry. It was a frequency designed to soften the nervous system. "Blessed are the pure in heart" was not idealism. It was a tuning fork for the dormant compassion woven into every human soul. Each phrase unlocked something ancient, something buried beneath fear and survival. Jalen felt the shift ripple through the crowd. Shoulders that had been tense for years relaxed. Breath deepened naturally. People who had arrived with clenched fists found their hands open without realizing it. Children who had been restless moments earlier suddenly sat in perfect stillness, as if they were listening to a voice older than language. Even those who understood nothing of the content felt an inexplicable warmth bloom in their chest. Varyn showed Jalen the mechanics behind the transformation. Jesus calibrated his field with precision, focusing his intention not on teaching minds, but on reawakening hearts. The vibration he projected synchronized with the emotional frequencies of thousands, dissolving layers of shame, fear, and hopelessness. For many, the experience was subtle. For others, it was life-altering. But for all, something irreversible shifted. The true miracle of the sermon was never the words themselves. It was the silent signal carried beneath them, a transmission that reminded every person present of who they truly were before the world taught them to forget. The hillside vanished, replaced by the cold geometry of Roman stone. Torches flickered along fortress walls, casting long shadows over armored soldiers who moved with mechanical precision. Varyn guided Jalen into a viewpoint the crowd on the mount never saw. The place where fear took shape not among peasants, but among those who ruled them. Rome did not monitor sermons for theology. Rome monitored anything that shifted obedience. And what they observed in Judea unsettled them more than any uprising ever had. Reports began as small, insignificant notes carried by scouts and informants. Gatherings larger than expected. Villagers abandoning arguments that once defined their days. Soldiers noticing that threats no longer provoked the same trembling compliance. Something in the population was changing, quietly but unmistakably. At first, Rome assumed it was political agitation, a new zealot movement forming beneath the surface. But when they sent observers to investigate, they found no weapons, no strategy, no calls for rebellion. What they found was far more dangerous. People were losing their fear. Jalen saw the moment a Roman officer witnessed this shift firsthand. He commanded a crowd to disperse, shouting with the authority that usually sent people scattering. But this time, they didn't run. They didn't challenge him either. They simply looked at him with a calmness that stole the power from his voice. Their stillness was not defiance. It was clarity. And clarity is something empires cannot fight. Rome thrived on predictable fear. Taxes were enforced through intimidation. Order was maintained through terror. Compliance was purchased with the threat of pain. But what happens when people no longer crumble under that threat? What happens when a single man's presence dissolves the psychological architecture of an empire? Varyn revealed the discussions whispered behind Roman walls. They noted that wherever Jesus traveled, tension decreased, aggression softened, and citizens began acting from conscience rather than fear. This was not revolution. It was evolution. And evolution is unstoppable. Rome did not fear his healings. They did not fear his teachings. They feared the quiet awakening he triggered in ordinary people. A population that thinks for itself is ungovernable. A population that feels empowered is uncontrollable. And a population that stops fearing death becomes impossible to rule. The empire recognized the threat long before Scripture acknowledged it. They understood what most theologians never truly grasped. Jesus was not dangerous because of miracles. He was dangerous because he freed people from the one force empires depend on to survive: fear. The Roman walls faded, replaced by the dim interior of a small room lit only by the trembling glow of an oil lamp. Varyn brought Jalen into a moment rarely understood, a moment history flattened into betrayal and legend twisted into villainy. Yet what unfolded before him held none of the malice later stories embedded into Judas's name. What he saw instead was far more human, far more tragic, and far more revealing of how fragile a destiny can be when fear enters the heart of one unprepared to carry the weight of a cosmic moment. Jalen felt the heaviness around Judas before understanding its cause. Judas was not scheming, he was unraveling. The air clung to him like a tightening noose, woven from doubts he tried desperately to silence. He admired Jesus, believed in him, followed him with genuine devotion. But devotion cracks easily when caught between the pull of higher truth and the crushing pressure of earthly power. Judas had stepped into the orbit of a man whose presence changed the atmosphere of entire crowds, but his own inner landscape remained fragile and unanchored. Varyn revealed the subtle forces that pressed on Judas from all directions. Religious authorities whispered warnings of blasphemy and divine punishment. Roman officers hinted at consequences for associating with someone who stirred the minds of the masses. Even some disciples questioned Jesus' growing influence, planting seeds of uncertainty Judas was too sensitive to ignore. He bore these tensions alone, unable to articulate them without feeling disloyal, yet unable to silence them without feeling fear. In Varyn's memory, Judas's field flickered with instability. His admiration for Jesus clashed violently with an overwhelming terror of what the future might demand. He feared the empire, feared punishment, feared being swept into a destiny he did not choose. And most of all, he feared disappointing a teacher who saw greatness in hearts long before hearts saw it in themselves. When Judas finally made his fateful decision, it was not driven by malice. It was driven by desperation. He sought control in a situation where every path terrified him. The betrayal was a collapse, not a conspiracy. A moment where fear overpowered faith, where pressure crushed integrity, where a fragile soul buckled under the weight of a destiny meant for stronger shoulders. Jalen realized Judas was not the villain of the story. He was its warning. A reminder that even those closest to the light can falter when fear becomes louder than truth. The flickering lamplight of Judas's turmoil faded, and Jalen felt the world shift into a place where silence carried more weight than sound. The air grew colder, denser, as though the night itself were grieving. When the vision settled, he found himself standing within the olive grove of Gethsemane, its ancient trees bending like witnesses to a sorrow too deep for language. Varyn did not speak immediately. Some scenes, they explained, demanded silence before truth could enter. This was the night even the watchers feared to remember. The garden held no crowds, no miracles, no teachings to soften the edges of what was coming. Only a small circle of disciples slept restlessly, unaware of how history pressed against the thin veil of the moment. But Jalen's attention was drawn not to them, but to the solitary figure a short distance away. Jesus knelt in the darkness, yet the darkness did not cloak him. It clung to him, trembling under the weight of something primal and ancient. Fear was not foreign to him. But tonight, fear was a presence so immense that even his elevated consciousness strained under it. Varyn revealed that the watchers hovered far above, hidden from every human eye. They had monitored countless civilizations, witnessed leaders rise and fall, seen both brutal and beautiful turning points in planetary evolution. But never had they seen a single human bear the emotional burden of an entire world. Jesus was not praying for rescue. He was absorbing the suffering of humanity, pulling into himself the fear, guilt, shame, violence, and despair that had accumulated over generations. His body trembled not with weakness, but with the impossible weight of carrying what billions had created through their own wounded hearts. Jalen felt the crushing heaviness of that energy. It pressed into his chest, constricted his breath, and filled his mind with echoes not his own. This was the part of the story humans rarely understood. Jesus did not fear death. He feared the magnitude of the task. To walk willingly into brutality, to transmute the darkest emotions of humanity through his own being, required a level of surrender that even the watchers had never witnessed. They watched as he processed agony that did not belong to him, agony he accepted because no one else had the strength to dissolve it. Varyn explained why intervention was forbidden. The cosmos operates on the law of free will, a truth as unbreakable as gravity. Intervention breaks evolution. Assistance interrupts the necessary awakening of a species. If the Watchers interfered, they would rob humanity of its turning point. The transformation Jesus was undertaking had to be chosen, not forced. And it had to be carried out by a human, not an extraterrestrial intelligence. Only then would the shift echo through the collective consciousness of the planet. From above, the Watchers felt helpless. They recorded energy spikes, emotional waves, and electromagnetic distortions as Jesus endured the darkest night of any human life. Even their advanced minds faltered at the raw magnitude of it. Some wanted to descend, to intervene, to ease the burden. But cosmic law bound them, and so they watched with a reverence bordering on sorrow as sweat mixed with blood on the ground beneath him. A biological reaction to stress so severe that the human body could barely sustain it. Jalen saw the moment Jesus stood again, not restored, not relieved, but resolved. A quiet decision rippled through the earth, subtle yet powerful enough to be felt by every sensitive being across dimensions. He would continue. He would face the fate laying itself before him, not because he was required to, but because he would not abandon the world to its own suffering. The Watchers held their breath. The cosmos shifted, and Jalen understood why this night remained one of the most sacred in all of human history. Not because of what followed, but because of what was chosen here. In a lonely garden beneath an indifferent sky, one man accepted the weight of an entire species so that humanity could one day remember the truth of what it was capable of becoming. Jalen expected agony. He expected brutality. He expected the kind of horror that makes even the strongest look away. But when Varyn guided him into the crucifixion, what unfolded before him was not merely a moment of human suffering. It was a planetary event, an energetic rupture woven into the fabric of Earth itself. The pain was real, excruciatingly real. Yet Varyn insisted that without seeing the hidden layers beneath that suffering, no human had ever truly understood what happened on that hill. The vision opened upon Golgotha, a barren rise scarred by years of executions. The air tasted metallic, heavy with dust and dread. People gathered not out of reverence, but morbid curiosity. Soldiers moved with practiced detachment, their armor clinking like echoes of a world that did not yet know it was changing. Yet, above them, unseen, countless watchers hovered, observing every flicker of energy emanating from the man they once studied as an anomaly. Jalen felt the dense emotional field hanging over the crowd. Rage, sorrow, hatred, confusion, all tangled together in a suffocating haze. But at the center of that storm was Jesus, and around him the atmosphere behaved differently. His suffering was immense, but his consciousness expanded outward instead of collapsing inward. Varyn revealed the energy patterns surrounding him, waves of coherence pushing against the chaos of the collective human field, as though he were stabilizing the planet through sheer will. The hammer struck. Metal met flesh. Jalen flinched, but Varyn pulled his attention not to the injury, but to the light erupting from it. Pain, in most humans, contracts the field, creating fear-driven distortions, but Jesus transmuted it. Every surge of agony became fuel for a higher frequency, radiating outward in rhythmic pulses. The watchers recorded the phenomenon with astonishment. His body weakened, but his consciousness grew brighter, expanding far beyond its physical boundaries. When the cross was raised, the earth beneath it trembled. Jalen saw the trembling differently than the crowd. It was not only seismic, it was energetic, as though the entire planet vibrated in response to the frequency pouring from one dying man. For the watchers, this was the moment they had waited for, the event that explained the anomaly they detected decades earlier. Jesus was restructuring the emotional grid of humanity, absorbing centuries of violence, fear, and guilt, and converting them into an offering of pure coherence. As hours passed, darkness fell. Not the darkness of clouds, but the darkness of a veil thinning. Varyn showed Jalen how the air shimmered around the cross, how dimensions overlapped for a brief moment. In that convergence, the human heart and the cosmic field met as equals. It was a ritual older than any religion, yet performed through the body of a single man who chose to bear a burden that did not belong to him. When Jesus released his final breath, the world exhaled with him. A wave moved across the land, invisible to the crowd, but unmistakable to the watchers. It penetrated stone, seeped into soil, echoed through living cells, and rewrote the energetic blueprint of humanity. Something ancient broke, something new ignited, and the earth itself seemed to adjust its rhythm. The crucifixion was not simply an execution, it was a transmission, a recalibration, a planetary initiation disguised as tragedy. And Jalen understood that history remembered the pain, but forgot the power. The true miracle of that day was not survival. It was transformation, radiating outward through the consciousness of a world that would spend millennia trying to understand what truly happened when one man died and an entire planet awakened. The hill of crucifixion dissolved, yet the trembling in the air did not fade. Instead, it deepened, as though the earth held its breath between one reality and the next. Jalen felt Varyn draw him toward the heart of Jerusalem, not to the crowds grieving or fleeing in panic, but to the inner chamber of the great temple. Here, hidden behind layers of gold, stone, and secrecy, the most sacred boundary in the ancient world stood waiting. Humans called it a veil, but Varyn insisted that the word was far too small for what it truly represented. The chamber appeared dim, lit only by slivers of sunlight slipping through narrow openings in the ceiling. Priests moved with rigid precision, unaware that the energy of the world was changing outside their walls. They guarded a barrier believed to separate humanity from the direct presence of the divine, a symbolic division between the mortal and the sacred. Yet symbols, as Varyn explained, often hide truths deeper than their creators ever intended. As Jesus released his final breath on the hill, a shockwave moved through the city with silent violence. At first it appeared like a tremor, the kind that unsettles lamps and rattles loose stones. But the force carried more than physical motion. It carried intention. It carried culmination. It carried the collapsing weight of everything Jesus had absorbed during his lifetime. It struck the temple like a bolt of unrecorded lightning, unseen by human eyes but undeniable to anything capable of perceiving energy. Jalen heard the first tear before seeing it. A low, rippling sound, like fabric strained by centuries of tension. The priests froze, their rituals interrupted by a dread they could not explain. Slowly, the veil began to split, not from the bottom, but from the top, as though an unseen hand moved downward with deliberate grace. Threads snapped one by one, releasing a vibration so intense the air itself quivered. But what tore was not merely cloth. Varyn revealed the invisible layer beneath it, a psychic membrane woven through millennia of belief, a collective agreement that humans were separate from the divine, a subconscious barrier created by fear, doctrine, and the weight of ancestral shame. The veil represented the distance humanity believed existed between itself and the source of creation. And now, in one overwhelming moment, that illusion collapsed. The tear sent shockwaves into the human psyche. People miles away felt something shift inside them without knowing why. Mothers dropped pottery and did not know what startled them. Children looked at the sky and felt a strange joy rise in their chest. Even soldiers paused mid-step, their hearts pounding with a fear that was not fear, but awakening. Varyn showed Jalen how the rupture spread beyond Jerusalem. The energetic grid surrounding the planet flickered, then stabilized at a higher frequency. The separation humans had carried for generations loosened. The possibility of direct connection, once reserved for mystics and prophets, now opened subtly to everyone, not as a bolt of revelation, but as an inner whisper, reminding them that divinity was not above them, but within them. This moment, forgotten by history except as a dramatic detail, was the true turning point. The tearing of the veil marked the end of an era where humans believed themselves unworthy of the divine. The subconscious wall between creator and creation weakened irrevocably. Jesus' death did not close a story. It opened a door, one that no power on earth could ever so shut again. The temple faded into darkness, and for a long moment, Jalen saw nothing at all. Not earth, not sky, not body, only an immense stillness, as if creation itself had paused to witness what would happen next. Varyn explained that the resurrection could never be understood from the outside, because what occurred inside the tomb was not an event of flesh, but of consciousness. And consciousness does not rise the way bodies do. It expands until matter has no choice but to follow. The vision formed slowly, revealing the sealed tomb, heavy stone resting against its entrance like a final decree. Inside, the air was dense and unmoving, carrying the faint scent of oils and linen. Yet beneath the wrappings that covered Jesus' body, something subtle began to shift. It did not start with breath or heartbeat. It began with a vibration, so delicate at first that even the watchers, hovering in the invisible spectrum around the tomb, struggled to register it. Varyn allowed Jalen to perceive the process through a perspective no human eyes had ever held. The body, still and broken, radiated faint pulses of light from within the cells themselves. These were not sparks of life returning, they were signals of reorganization. Jesus was aligning his consciousness with a frequency far higher than the physical world, and in that alignment, his biological structure began responding like iron filings, arranging themselves around a magnet. Every cell held data, memory, geometry, and instruction. Human bodies maintain their form by continually repeating the patterns encoded within them. but Jesus was now rewriting those patterns. The vibration intensified, weaving light into matter like threads into fabric. At first, the changes were microscopic, shifts in the spin of subatomic particles, realigning them into a new configuration. The molecules within his muscles and bones rearranged with mathematical precision, guided by a consciousness operating beyond the limits of mortal perception. Jalen saw the linen shroud lift slightly, not through movement of flesh, but through the expansion of the field surrounding the body. Light filled the chamber, growing from a glow into a brilliance that seemed to breathe. The physical world bent around the frequency, unable to maintain its usual rigidity. Time felt elastic. Space felt fluid. The watchers observed in reverent silence, recording patterns they had only ever seen in advanced civilizations whose mastery over reality came from millennia of evolution. Then came the turning point. Jesus fully merged with the higher consciousness state he had prepared for throughout his life. The separation between spirit and matter dissolved. His body began to dematerialize, not vanishing but transforming into light-coated information. It flickered between visible and invisible, as though the laws that bound him no longer applied. This was not resurrection in the sense of a corpse revived. This was transfiguration. Matter responding to an intelligence that understood how to reshape itself. When the light contracted and stabilized, the physical form returned, but different, lighter, finer. No longer bound by density or decay. The stone outside would later move, not because hands pushed it, but because reality itself shifted to accommodate the presence now emerging from within. Jalen understood then what Varyn meant. Jesus did not rise because death was reversed. He rose because he became something death could not touch. Matter had surrendered to consciousness. Light had become the architect of form. And the resurrection was not the end of a story, but the unveiling of what a human being becomes when fully awakened. The brilliance of the tomb faded, and Jalen found himself standing in a world transformed. Dawn light spilled across hills and rooftops, yet something in the air felt altered at its core. Varyn explained that the resurrection was not the conclusion of Jesus' mission. It was the threshold. What followed in the 40 days afterward would shape the trajectory of human consciousness for centuries. Scripture recorded appearances. Theology turned them into proofs. But the reality, Varyn insisted, was far more profound. These encounters were not visits. They were activations. The first gathering appeared before Jalen as though memory itself thickened into form. A group of disciples, disoriented and grieving, huddled together inside a locked room. They did not meet in hope. They met in fear. Rome hunted them. Their leader was dead. Their hearts trembled with the collapse of everything they believed. Yet as they whispered among themselves, a shift rippled through the space. Not a sound, not a step, a frequency. Jesus emerged, not by entering, but by phasing into visibility as easily as breath condenses on glass. His presence calmed the entire room with a single sensation: stillness. He did not lecture them. He did not repeat the teachings they already knew. Instead, Varyn showed Jalen how Jesus reached into the field around each individual, stabilizing their emotional frequencies, dissolving their fear, and lifting their consciousness closer to his own. He was not giving instructions. He was raising them. Their nervous systems vibrated differently in his presence, aligning with a resonance they had only glimpsed before his death. As he spoke, each word carried encoded intention. "Peace be with you" was not a greeting. It was a transmission, a reset, a resetting of their internal circuitry so they could maintain elevated awareness without depending on his physical presence. When he breathed upon them, it was not symbolic. It was the deliberate transfer of coherent energy meant to awaken their dormant abilities. They felt warmth ignite at the base of their spine, tingling behind the forehead, pressure expanding in the chest. These sensations were not mystical metaphors. They were energetic phenomena, preparing them for a path they never expected to walk alone. Varyn revealed that Jesus appeared to different groups with different frequencies. To the travelers on the road to Emmaus, he activated perception, allowing them to see truth hidden beneath ordinary appearances. To the women at the tomb, he activated intuition, amplifying the feminine channel of knowing. To Thomas, he activated discernment, raising the frequency that bridges doubt and understanding. These were not random encounters. They were targeted alignments. Jalen saw another moment, quieter yet more intimate. By the shoreline of Galilee, Jesus met his followers as dawn painted the water in shades of gold. He spoke with them not about doctrine, but about embodiment, about carrying the frequency themselves, about remembering that transformation did not end with him. They were not meant to worship his resurrection. They were meant to internalize it. The most powerful moment came atop a hillside, where Jesus appeared for one of the last times. The field radiating from him stretched for miles, a luminous force washing over all present. Jalen felt it too. It was a final attunement, a calibration of the human heart to a higher spectrum. When Jesus ascended, it was not a departure, it was a dispersal. His consciousness integrated into the energetic grid of Earth itself, ensuring that no human would ever again be fully separated from the frequency he carried. The 40 days were not a farewell. They were a handoff, a transfer of responsibility, a reminder that the work was never meant to end with one awakened human, but to begin with many. The light of the hillside faded, and Jalen felt the shift long before the vision formed. It was heavier, denser, as though humanity itself had wrapped a bandage around a wound it refused to acknowledge. Varyn guided him into a different era, centuries removed from the desert paths Jesus once walked. The world now pulsed with a new kind of energy, not the expanding resonance Jesus left behind, but something slower, colder, and meticulously engineered. This was the age when the message began to fracture, not through malice at first, but through fear disguised as order. The vision settled into a hall lit by torches, filled with men who believed they were shaping the future of faith. They debated texts, argued over meanings, and scribbled notes that would become sacred law. But Jalen noticed what Varyn wanted him to see. These men were not mystics. They were administrators, political figures, advisors to emperors, leaders trying to tame a wildfire of awakening by building walls around it. Their intentions were not entirely dark. Many believed they were protecting truth, but truth, once caged, ceases to be truth. It becomes doctrine. Varyn explained that after Jesus' departure, the frequency he left behind spread rapidly. Ordinary people experienced visions, awakenings, intuitive gifts, and moments of profound inner transformation. Villagers who had never been taught to read spoke of oneness. Farmers sensed divinity within themselves. Women, children, and the poor found themselves suddenly aware of a power they had been told they did not possess. The message grew too quickly, too freely, and institutions, threatened by anything that decentralized authority, began their quiet work. The council chambers became the birthplace of omission. Jalen watched as entire concepts were lifted out of early teachings, not because they were false, but because they were dangerous to hierarchical control. Reincarnation, once widely accepted, allowed souls to evolve without priests mediating salvation. Inner divinity suggested that every human was capable of direct connection with the source, making spiritual intermediaries unnecessary. Self-mastery meant salvation was an inner awakening, not an institutionally administered ritual. These ideas were not rejected because they lacked truth. They were rejected because they empowered individuals. Jalen saw the tension in the room, not simply intellectual, but energetic. Whenever a passage hinting at inner divinity was read aloud, the field brightened slightly, as though Jesus' frequency still lingered in the words. But each time it was struck out, the room dimmed. Not metaphorically, literally. The air thickened. The light grew heavy. Something sacred recoiled silently. Varyn lifted Jalen above the councils and showed the world reacting. Where teachings were preserved in small pockets, light flickered in humble homes and remote gatherings. Mystics carried fragments of the original frequency in secret. But where doctrine tightened its grip, people grew spiritually numb. The message became externalized. Salvation became a transaction. Divinity moved from within to above, placed out of reach and mediated through authority. The hijacking was subtle, a centuries-long drift rather than a single act, but its impact was profound. Humanity forgot its own power. The church grew stronger, but the people grew weaker. And the message meant to awaken millions became a system meant to govern them. Jalen realized then that the greatest betrayal was not Judas's moment of fear. It was the slow rewriting of a message meant for liberation into one designed for control. And yet, Varyn whispered, the original frequency was never destroyed, only buried, still waiting to be rediscovered by those willing to look within instead of upward. The vision shifted again, but this time Jalen sensed something different in Varyn before the scene even formed. A heaviness, a sorrow woven through memory so ancient it seemed older than Scripture itself. When the world around them settled into view, it was not a place, but a vantage point. A silent perch above earth, where Varyn's kind once hovered, watching a transformation they were forbidden to influence. The stars flickered like witnesses. The planet turned slowly below, and within that vast stillness, regret pulsed like a wound that had never healed. Varyn showed Jalen how the Watchers observed the centuries following Jesus' departure with hopeful anticipation at first. They expected humanity to expand the frequency he ignited, to spread it like ripples through oceans of consciousness. They saw early communities practicing compassion, equality, healing, and shared intention. They saw people awakening to inner divinity without temples or hierarchies. For a fleeting moment in human history, the world glowed with possibility. But then the shift came. It was not sudden. It was not loud. It was not even malicious at the beginning. It arrived quietly, the way night slips into dusk. A single alteration in interpretation. A small compromise for the sake of order. A fear that freedom would lead to chaos. Varyn's species watched how one generation's revelation became the next generation's regulation. How teachings of inner authority became tools of outer control. How words meant to liberate were sharpened into weapons of doctrine, fear, and division. They watched wars ignited in the name of a man who preached peace. They watched spiritual hierarchy mirror political hierarchy until the two became indistinguishable. They watched nations demand loyalty to a God whose true essence was beyond ownership. They watched people who once saw the divine within begin to fear the divine above. And with each distortion, the frequency Jesus cultivated dimmed further, flickering like a candle in gathering wind. Jalen felt the ache radiating from Varyn. It was not guilt. It was a deeper kind of sorrow. The sorrow of beings who can see the trajectory of consciousness, but lack the permission to alter it. Varyn explained that their species operated under a strict law of non-interference. They could observe, they could record, they could study energy shifts, but they could not intervene in the psychological evolution of a developing civilization. To influence belief was to influence destiny, and destiny belonged only to those who lived within the world's boundaries. Still, watching humanity weaponize a message of unity felt like witnessing a fire they were not allowed to extinguish. Jalen saw Varyn's memory of a moment when several Watchers petitioned to intervene, pleading that the distortion spreading across empires would echo through centuries of human suffering. Their request was denied. Interference, even for noble reasons, would strip humanity of authentic choice. Evolution without freedom, Varyn said, is not evolution. It is programming. So they watched. They recorded. They grieved. And the regret came not only from what humans did, but from what they lost. Entire lines of mystics were silenced. Teachings of reincarnation were buried. Knowledge of energetic healing was outlawed. The awareness that divinity lived within every human was replaced with fear of distant judgment. The world forgot its own power, and the watchers could only witness the forgetting. Yet Varyn insisted that regret was not the end of the story. Buried frequencies never die. Distortions eventually collapse under their own weight. And the message that was once weaponized would, in time, return to its original form, not through institutions, but through individuals awakening one by one. Jalen sensed the hope beneath the sorrow. Even regret, Varyn explained, can be a seed of restoration. Jalen expected the story to descend into darkness after witnessing how institutions reshaped a message meant to free the human spirit. But Varyn guided him somewhere unexpected, into the quiet threads of history that survived far from councils, empires, and rewritten doctrines. Hidden beneath the surface of civilizations, scattered across deserts, mountains, and ancient trading routes, lived lineages of men and women who refused to let the original teaching die. They were not famous. They held no political power. Their names rarely appeared in recorded history. Yet they carried a flame that empires could not extinguish. The vision began in a dimly lit cave carved into the side of a desert cliff. A group of early followers gathered in silence, not to worship, but to practice. Their bodies sat still, their breath slowed, and their minds shifted inward. There were no icons, no altars, and no elaborate rituals, only awareness. Varyn explained that long before Christianity took form as an institution, these quiet communities learned how to meditate, how to raise their internal frequency, and how to sustain the resonance Jesus awakened in them. They understood that the kingdom he spoke of was not a place, but a state. From the desert, the vision jumped across continents. Jalen saw mystics in Persia deciphering coded messages hidden within parables. He saw teachers in the mountains of Syria guarding scrolls that spoke of reincarnation and inner light. He saw quiet gatherings in Alexandria, where men and women practiced energetic healing, echoing the methods Jesus once demonstrated openly. None of these groups sought influence. They sought preservation. Varyn guided Jalen deeper into these lineages, revealing how they communicated through symbols, metaphors, and secret texts passed hand to hand. They did not fear persecution, they expected it, and so they hid the teachings in ways only the awakened could understand. A phrase in a parable, a geometric symbol carved into stone, a sequence of numbers in a manuscript margin, a simple blessing whispered in a dying language. Each contained a fragment of the original path. These underground traditions survived not because they were powerful, but because they were adaptable. When empires shifted, they moved. When authorities imposed new doctrines, they embedded truths within the distortions. When holy books were edited, they whispered what had been removed. They became custodians of memory, carrying forward the pieces of a map that no longer existed in its entirety. Jalen sensed the enormity of what Varyn showed him. The real teaching had never disappeared. It had gone underground. It had spread into mystical sects, into esoteric practices, into philosophical movements that Western history dismissed as fringe. Gnostics who taught that divinity lived within. Essenes who practiced inner mastery. Desert fathers who meditated rather than preached. Early healers who used sound, breath, and intention, long before science rediscovered these principles. For centuries, these people existed in the shadows, not because they feared the world, but because the world feared them. They represented a truth that no institution could control, a truth that insisted humans were not powerless, sinful, or separate from creation. They were luminous beings, temporarily forgetting themselves. The lineages never died. They simply waited, passing their fragments from one generation to the next, trusting that one day humanity would be ready to piece them together again. And as Varyn's memory faded, Jalen realized that the time of retrieval had already begun. The remnants of ancient caves and desert sanctuaries dissolved around Jalen, replaced by a horizon pulsing with a faint, shimmering glow. It was neither sunrise nor sunset, neither past nor future. It was a threshold, a point where timelines converged like rivers meeting the sea. Varyn stood beside him, not as a distant observer, but as someone carrying a weight too great for silence. Jalen sensed that everything shown so far the life of Jesus, the distortion of his message, the hidden lineages guarding fragments of truth, had been preparing him for what came next. The question was no longer what happened 2,000 years ago. The question was why Varyn had broken the law of non-interference to speak now. Varyn revealed that humanity was approaching a moment similar to the one that had drawn the Watchers to Earth during Jesus' lifetime. A rising frequency, a growing coherence, a shift in collective consciousness so subtle that governments ignored it, yet so powerful that the universe could not. Over the past decades, millions of humans had begun to awaken in small, private ways, quiet realizations, sudden intuition, unexplainable inner transformations. What once belonged to mystics had begun spreading to ordinary people across the world. It was happening in bedrooms, workplaces, forests, cities, and even in the midst of chaos. Jalen saw how Varyn's kind monitored this rising wave. To them, it appeared as a luminous web stretching across the planet, flickering where people meditated, connected, forgave, healed, or simply questioned old beliefs. Each act of courage brightened the grid. Each act of cruelty dimmed it. And the pattern, Varyn explained, had begun accelerating faster than any point in recorded history. Humanity stood at the edge of a new evolutionary step, one that could dissolve centuries of division or plunge the world into deeper fragmentation. The threshold was neither guaranteed nor predetermined. It was a possibility, an unfixed future shaped by choices made moment to moment. That uncertainty was why Varyn spoke now. He explained that during Jesus' time, humanity was offered a path toward collective awakening, but the message became entangled in power structures, fear, and the desire for control. That path remained unfinished, its momentum stalled, its meaning buried beneath doctrines. Now, for the first time in 2 millennia, global consciousness had risen again to a point where the original frequency could re-emerge not through a single figure, but through millions simultaneously. Jalen saw images flash before him, protests where strangers protected each other, scientists discovering principles that mirrored ancient metaphysics, children being born with heightened empathy, individuals leaving institutions in search of inner truth. But he also saw the shadows rising alongside the light. Manipulation through technology, polarization amplified by fear, institutions tightening their grip as they sense authority slipping away. The world was entering a crucible where the direction of consciousness could swing either toward liberation or deeper control. Varyn confessed that this time, unlike the first, their species could not remain silent. The risk was too great. If humanity awakened, it would re-enter the cosmic community with clarity and sovereignty. If it failed, it might collapse into fragmentation that would echo for centuries. Varyn spoke not to intervene, but to illuminate. Not to direct humanity, but to awaken those capable of influencing the collective field. The threshold approached like a rising tide. And Varyn's final message to Jalen was simple. The next era would not be shaped by leaders or institutions, but by the frequency of ordinary people choosing remembrance over fear. The awakening of one could affect many. The awakening of many could transform the world. The horizon of shimmering light faded, leaving Jalen suspended in a stillness that felt ancient and intimate at the same time. He sensed that Varyn was preparing to reveal something guarded, something withheld until now, because humanity had not been ready to hear it. The air felt charged with meaning, as though creation itself waited for the truth to unfold. When Varyn finally spoke, there was no dramatic declaration, only a quiet unveiling of a reality far more transformative than any miracle or myth. What Jesus truly was, Varyn explained, could never fit inside the narrow definitions humanity built around him. He was neither a distant deity nor an ordinary man elevated by legend. He was a human being operating at the full capacity encoded within the species itself, not an exception, but an example. The blueprint, not the anomaly. And the reason his life rippled through history was not because he possessed something others lacked, but because he activated something others had forgotten. Jalen saw the truth through Varyn's perspective, not as a story, but as a field of energy surrounding the man from Nazareth. His consciousness vibrated with coherence, each thought aligned with intention, each intention aligned with compassion. His nervous system operated without distortion, free from the emotional debris that clouds ordinary perception. His heart field radiated a frequency so harmonized that it affected people before he spoke a word. This synergy of mind, heart, and energy created what humans called miracles. But Varyn emphasized there was nothing supernatural about it. It was natural human potential, fully expressed. Varyn revealed that Jesus spent years cultivating this state, mastering the inner mechanics of awareness through training that united the wisdom of multiple lineages. He practiced breathwork that expanded perception. He learned how to regulate the body's electric currents. He studied the geometry of sound and intention, and in these practices, he discovered what few had ever achieved: the ability to align his biological, emotional, and energetic systems into one unified frequency. This state allowed him to heal not by power, but by resonance, to guide not by authority, but by presence, to teach not through words alone, but through energetic transmission. Jalen felt the magnitude of this revelation. Humanity had worshipped Jesus for centuries, yet misunderstood the very thing that made him extraordinary. People revered him as unattainable, yet ignored his own teaching that greater things than these would you do. Jesus never asked to be placed on a pedestal. He asked to be followed in practice, not in admiration. His message was not "worship me." It was "become what I have become. Remember what you already are." Varyn showed Jalen how Jesus' brain operated not at ordinary frequencies but at harmonics that allowed direct access to creativity, intuition, and expanded awareness. His heart coherence was so strong that it synchronized the emotional fields of entire crowds. His understanding of intention allowed him to bend probability and influence matter. These abilities were not divine gifts. They were the unlocked potential of a human whose consciousness no longer fought itself. The tragedy, Varyn said, was that humanity mistook an example for an exception. Instead of seeing the path, they built altars. Instead of practicing the methods, they canonized the man. Instead of awakening, they adored. And in doing so, they placed the possibility of their own transformation forever out of reach. Yet the truth remained. Jesus was the prototype of awakened humanity, a model of what humans could become when fear dissolved, when intuition sharpened, when compassion ruled, and when consciousness remembered its own power. Jalen realized then that the greatest secret was not what Jesus did, it was what humans are still capable of doing. The blueprint had never been lost. It had only been forgotten, waiting for the moment when humanity would dare to remember that holiness was not reserved for the few. It was the destiny of the many. The revelation settled over Jalen like a second skin, impossibly light, yet impossibly heavy. Varyn's final words about human potential still echoed through his mind, but now the vision around him dissolved into the dim interior of his own living room. The contrast between cosmic truth and earthly normalcy struck him with unsettling force. The soft hum of appliances, the faint glow of city lights outside, the mundane texture of the couch beneath his hands, all felt foreign, as though he had returned to a world too small to contain what he now carried. Varyn stood nearby, silent and watchful, not imposing, not instructing, simply witnessing the internal storm forming within Jalen's chest. For the first time, Jalen felt the weight of responsibility more than the awe of revelation. He had seen the hidden layers of history, the mechanics of miracles, the distortion of sacred teachings, and the approaching threshold of global awakening. He had seen what Jesus truly represented, and he had seen how fragile the balance of human consciousness remained. Now he held a truth capable of igniting hope or unleashing chaos, depending entirely on how it was revealed. Jalen understood immediately why Varyn had chosen him. Not for his brilliance, not for his influence, but because he held a rare blend of curiosity and restraint. He sought truth without craving power. He asked questions without demanding certainty. Yet understanding the choice did nothing to ease the pressure tightening around his ribs. The question loomed with an almost physical mass. What now? If he shared the alien's confession, the world might fracture. Religions built on millennia of interpretation would resist violently. Governments might bury him, fearing disruption. Skeptics would attack him. Believers might idolize him. And those seeking control would seize the narrative long before the truth had a chance to settle. A single misstep could turn revelation into weaponry. The thought filled him with dread, but silence felt equally impossible. How could he return to his ordinary routines, knowing what lay beneath the fabric of human history? How could he smile at colleagues, scroll through headlines, or listen to sermons without hearing the echo of suppressed frequencies and forgotten teachings? How could he walk among people who believed themselves powerless, knowing divinity pulsed within them like an unopened seed? Silence felt like betrayal, yet speaking felt like catastrophe. Varyn approached, not to sway his choice, but to honor the struggle itself. Jalen realized that the alien had no expectation, no instructions, no assignment. The burden was not a mission, it was a crossroad, and he alone could choose which path human history would brush against through his voice. A wave of understanding rippled through him. The truth was not meant to be shouted, nor hidden. It was meant to be awakened, one mind at a time, through resonance rather than rebellion. Perhaps the world did not need a proclamation. Perhaps it needed a whisper, a story, a seed planted gently rather than a torch thrown recklessly into a dry field. Jalen breathed slowly, feeling both fear and clarity mingle within him. He would not lie. He would not expose. He would not remain silent. He would speak carefully, truth wrapped in narrative, revelation hidden in symbolism, awakening disguised as wonder, not to convince, but to remember. The burden remained heavy, but it no longer crushed him. It shaped him. And for the first time, he sensed that holding this truth was not a curse. It was his initiation. The room around Jalen dissolved once more, not into a vision of the past or a glimpse of alien memory, but into something far closer and far more intimate. There was no desert, no temple, no cosmic vantage point. Only a quiet, boundless darkness that felt like the inside of a breath held too long. And in that stillness, he realized Varyn was no longer speaking to him alone. The focus had shifted. The weight of the moment redirected itself outward, reaching beyond Jalen's mind, beyond the walls of the room, beyond the boundaries of the story itself. It reached toward you. The air hummed with a frequency not meant to instruct, but to remind. Varyn explained that everything revealed so far Jesus' awakening, the distortion of his message, the hidden lineages, the approaching threshold, was never meant to be stored as information. It was meant to be lived, not worshipped, not debated, not turned into doctrine. Awakening was always intended to be personal. Jalen felt the truth vibrate through him like a tuning fork struck by a steady hand. Jesus' life had become the foundation for religions, rituals, and rules. Yet none of those things captured the essence of what he came to demonstrate. His message was never meant to be confined to cathedrals or guarded by institutions. He never asked to be elevated above humanity. He asked humanity to rise to meet their own potential. Varyn's voice softened as the darkness around them shifted, revealing faint points of light, each representing a single human life. Millions upon millions scattered across Earth like sparks, floating in a vast night. Some bright, some dim, some flickering with uncertainty. Varyn explained that awakening is not a collective decree. It begins as a private stirring inside one person, then another, until the world changes not through force, but through accumulation. Each light flickered as though acknowledging the truth. Jesus' teachings were never meant to build an empire. They were meant to build inner worlds capable of withstanding chaos. His parables were not puzzles for scholars. They were keys for ordinary people feeling lost. His miracles were not demonstrations of divine favoritism. They were glimpses into what humans could access when fear dissolves and coherence takes its place. Jalen watched as the lights shifted, dim ones flaring for a heartbeat, bright ones steadying, flickering ones stabilizing. Varyn explained that awakening is not about adopting new beliefs or rejecting old ones. It is not about religion, labels, or declarations. It is about remembering. Remembering the inner stillness buried beneath anxiety. Remembering the intuition buried beneath noise. Remembering the strength buried beneath doubt. Remembering the spark buried beneath centuries of conditioning that taught humanity to look upward instead of inward. The message was simple, yet transformative. You are not separate from the divine field that Jesus accessed. The same potential sleeps inside you. Awakening is not granted. It is practiced, not demanded, chosen, not inherited, remembered. Jalen felt the magnitude of the shift. The story he once believed was about a distant cosmic confession revealed itself as something else entirely. A mirror held up to the viewer. A hand extended through time. A reminder that the path he witnessed in visions was not meant to stay in visions. It was meant to be walked. And as the lights floating in the darkness pulsed like a beating heart, Varyn directed the final truth not to Jalen, but to you. The next chapter of awakening is not written by institutions, prophets, or watchers. It is written by every individual who chooses to rise above fear and remember what they truly are. The darkness surrounding Jalen began to tremble, not with fear, but with an intensity that felt like the final inhale before a revelation too large for language. The floating lights representing human consciousness flickered, as though anticipating the weight of what was about to be spoken. Varyn's presence grew softer, almost translucent, as if the boundary between alien and light was dissolving. This was not just another vision. It was the last transmission, the closing of a door and the opening of another, meant not for Jalen alone, but for every consciousness capable of hearing the truth carried beneath the words. Varyn explained that humanity had spent 2,000 years waiting for a return that was never meant to arrive the way people imagined. Not on clouds, not with trumpets, not through a singular figure descending from the sky. The second coming was never about one man reappearing. It was about a state of consciousness reawakening. Jesus did not leave so humanity could worship him. He left so humanity could become what he had become. The blueprint had been planted, the seed buried not in scripture, but in the human field itself. And now, as the world approached a threshold of choice, that seed had begun to stir. The lights around Jalen shifted, glowing brighter, their radiance pulsing in rhythm with an unseen heartbeat. Varyn revealed that the planet was entering a phase where awakening could accelerate exponentially. not through institutions or miracles, but through individuals remembering who they were meant to be. The second coming was not a prophecy to be watched. It was a state to be embodied. Every act of compassion, every moment of clarity, every step taken in truth instead of fear. Each one ignited the same frequency that Jesus carried. Humans were waiting for someone to save them, unaware that the real task was learning to save themselves. Jesus had shown the path not by demanding belief, but by demonstrating coherence. He healed because his field was pure. He saw clearly because his fears collapsed. He manifested because intention flowed through him without distortion. He loved without condition because he recognized the divine in every face he met. These abilities were not exclusive to him. They were dormant in humanity, waiting for the moment consciousness reached a tipping point. Jalen felt a pressure in his chest, a merging of fear, awe, and responsibility. Varyn's form grew increasingly transparent, as though retreating into a spectrum human eyes could no longer perceive. The alien explained that their role was ending. They were observers, not saviors, guides, not gods. The next phase belonged entirely to humanity, and Jalen, having witnessed the truth, was now bound to it. Not as a prophet, not as a leader, simply as a carrier of resonance, a keeper of remembrance. The final message came as both a whisper and a thunderclap inside Jalen's mind. The second coming is inside you. It is not an arrival. It is an awakening. It is the moment you stop waiting for light and realize you are made of it. It is the moment you stop repeating stories of powerlessness and begin writing new ones, rooted in the truth of your own potential. Jesus was the first to embody this, not the last. The lights around Jalen expanded until they flooded everything, dissolving the boundary between vision and reality. When the brilliance faded, Varyn was gone. No farewell, no lingering echo, only the gravity of the mission left behind. Jalen stood in his silent room, heart pounding, breath unsteady, knowing that the burden was now his to carry, but the transformation belonged to the world. And the responsibility, Varyn had made clear, belonged to you. If something in this story stirred you, if you felt a pull you cannot explain, if a forgotten truth began whispering through the cracks of your awareness, then the awakening has already begun. Share this story. Let it move through you. Let it remind others of what sleeps inside them. The next chapter of humanity will not be written by those who wait. It will be written by those who remember.